Cam Hauser, welcome to the show. How are we doing, my friend?
Howdy, Mitch. Life is good. Happy to talk with you.
Dude, so am I. So there are a few things I'm excited to talk to you today about. I want to talk to you briefly about the 3-day startup, that program that you started a while back. I want to talk to you about the personal board of directors, which is this thing that you do that I love. And I read your blog post years ago about it, and I was like, man, that's so cool. I want to do that. So I want to talk about that, as well as I think you're a lecturer for UT entrepreneurship program,
hmm
which I think is awesome. And I know you travel, or at least have traveled a bit, working with large companies or universities, doing these different programs. And so I want to learn what that is that you do. So we got a lot here. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. What is the 3-day startup?
Yeah. So I moved to Austin 20 years ago to start a bunch of indie rock bands and to start tech startups. I was much better at startups than I was indie rock bands. So that kind of fell by the wayside. I started a tech company. We were basically SoundCloud for sports commentary. It was just never going to work. And it was supremely illegal. I mean, there's a lot of like great businesses that when they start, they're illegal. YouTube was illegal. Napster was legal when they started, but this one we couldn't raise money against it. It was just too illegal. And then started another tech startup that also failed. So I did what a stupid person does is I went to grad school, which is a very expensive way to, figure out your next chapter. But I had that in mind and I was getting an MBA at the University of Texas. And while there, I took an entrepreneurship class because I had just been in the trenches building these failed startups. And that program, that MBA program is a phenomenal business school and they have great entrepreneurship. But I was still horrified at it. It was still very, very theory based. And a lot of the people teaching weren't entrepreneurs themselves. So me and some other folks, some other people I met on campus in different parts, we just had this idea that, listen, there is too much theory here. We just need to get started. And so the 3-day startup was our first attempt at that, which was basically getting smart people in a room together, getting them hopped up on Red Bull and starting companies. And the idea being that a very action focused perspective on this would lead more interesting places than us sitting around and strategizing and theorizing, which is what tends to happen a lot in higher ed. So we started this student group at the University of Texas and it caught on. We had some really good things happen. Some of our early people who took this program, the next thing that happened was they got into Y Combinator. And then another person started something that about 9 months later got acquired by Etsy. And so immediately we realized, wow, we're getting these pretty cool outcomes. We should push this. And we keep running it. We tried in a couple other schools. We tried in Germany where we wasn't sure if it was actually going to work there. And it did because an exchange student went to Germany to try it out. And we was okay. So this was, I'm getting this expensive MBA, but I realized if I didn't go all in on this idea, I was going to just hate myself. So kind of got lucky. Our timing was really good in terms of the entrepreneurship education boom, that was happening in the United States and globally. And I spent the next 10 years taking this short format program all over the world. So I got to learn what it's like to build a company, scale it, have a board, which again, we'll get into boards and thinking about that. And also just what it means, what's the difference in how people start a company in Taiwan versus Bangalore versus Rio. It was really interesting to learn how culture affects how entrepreneurs start companies and what that works like. And a lot of our success was we were kind of competing with Startup Weekend at the time, which, they obviously grew and we were kind of the two kind of big dogs in that short format kind of boot camp world. And our model was always really predicated on revenues and understanding how you're going to make money. So we kind of focused on that, which translated very well outside of the rest of the world because a lot of the rest of the world sees Silicon Valley as la la land. So no, it was just a joy to take that over the world, to get to know all these entrepreneurs, build this community. And it was also nice to have a company that worked because I was starting to wonder if I'm an idiot for still trying this after all this time.
Nice. That's really cool. I'm a big believer in taking this big thing, future state that we think we want, or that we do want, and breaking that down in small ways. And so like literally 3 days for a 3-day startup, if that is
Mm-hmm.
something that people are interested in. I guess what was one of the main takeaways there? I'd imagine regardless if you're in Taiwan or Brazil or the US, you need to get paying customers to pay for your thing rather than just ideate about it?
Yeah, I mean, there were too many takeaways to hit here, but the big one was just get started, just
Hmm.
go. And I remember one of the first programs we ran in the Netherlands. I was there, and there was this guy who was getting a PhD there, and he pulled me aside and he said, "Cam, there's no way your company's going to work. You have no intellectual property. I mean, honestly, like 3 days hackathons, like there was just nothing patentable there, nothing unique, no special sauce." This was early on in the company, so I was younger and dumber, and I heard this guy out. I actually listened to him, and he was telling me all these flaws in the business, and I was like, "Oh gosh, like this guy might be right." I thought about it some more, but I didn't really tell anybody. I just said, well, I remember these arguments, but I'm going to keep going. We keep growing the company. And I did. And I checked on this guy about 5 years later, and he was just finishing his PhD program, and he hadn't done shit with his life. And I felt just so overjoyed that I got to travel the world, make a lot of money, build my reputation amongst the community that I cared about, get to join the Successful Founders Club, all these things. Well, this guy had done nothing. And I haven't checked him since then because I just don't care that much. But it was a very interesting takeaway of a lot of people never get off the couch. A lot of people never get beyond the whiteboard. And you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You don't need to have the deepest connections. You don't need to have the best skills. Just getting started puts you ahead of so many people. And I
Mm.
never forget that. And I think about it all the time.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think big lesson there is getting that feedback, whether it's feedback from customers, feedback from the real world, just putting something out there, getting started. Oftentimes you'll realize things that you didn't just from ideating. And I
Mm-hmm.
guess that's a good segue to another form of getting feedback is perhaps feedback that you want and that you will listen to. Not everyone's feedback, like that individual you talked about, was someone that you want to take into consideration, but other times it is. And you do this really cool thing called a personal board of directors, which I remember reading your blog post. I think it's an older blog post. I read it a few years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and there are certain things I'll read online that it just immediately hit, and I was like, "This is awesome." However, I haven't implemented it yet, and so I've done like a version of it of just like typing out like a quarterly update type thing, but I've never sent it. So I'm curious. I'd love to just to talk to you about how you set yours up, what that looks like, and then maybe how others could do the same. So where'd you come up with this concept? How did it start? What's it look like?
Sure. So just to set the frame with that company I just talked about with 3 Day Startup, is my first time having a board. It's the first time I built a company that was successful enough to have a board. And you're running board meetings, which are pretty nerve wracking at first, but you realize there's this group of people here who they care about the success of the business, and you can come to them with your problems. You didn't actually have to come to with them, here's everything, it's all worked out. They told me, no, listen, bring your challenges and your problems to us, and we will try to help you solve them. And after a while, I realized, like, wow, this is great. I want this in my personal life.
Mm,
So I had a group of college friends who would get together once a year for a music festival or something and get drunk, which is, you know, young, dumb stuff, which is fine. But I just realized, like, man, I've got these smart people, these friends. Maybe there's like a better way we could approach this. And selfishly, I would like to have a group of people help me with my problems. And I also was raised in a very stoic kind of way where just I felt weak asking for help. And so my idea was, you know what, if I use the language of business, maybe it's a way for me to ask for help without feeling weird about it. So I pitched this to my friends, and they said, Cam, this sounds like another one of your weird ideas, but we'll give it a shot. And so we got together one year, and this one friend was having some challenge in his relationship life, and he vocalized that. And as soon as he did that, everyone else realized, oh, we're going to get real here. Because he really had the courage to share this like really challenging thing he was having with his wife. And that was the beginning of this really magical thing where we've done it, I think maybe 11 years in a row at this point, where it's become this thing where it was a weekend and now it's almost 5 days long. Everyone comes early. It's become this really focal point of our friendship,
mm,
where we used to do this in cool cities like Los Angeles because we wanted to go out and have fun. And now we intentionally choose boring cities. And we've nailed the kind of rhythms and structure, and the blog post kind of goes over that, what works. But in short, it's a chance for you just to tell your friends what's going on, talk for 5, 10 minutes, maybe less, And then they ask you questions and give you guidance, and it lets them know what you're dealing with. And so they might have good advice and guidance right there in the room, but a lot of times we don't need advice. A lot of times we just need someone looking out for us. And if we, need to figure out how to do a home renovation project, or we need to figure out how to get into grad school, or we need to figure out how to not feel lonely, just articulating those things, your friends will think about it. And it becomes this running dialogue that they're thinking about over the course of the year. So the text message thread quality got way better in the group chat. And just in terms of it's like having a group of agents out in the world thinking about helping you.
Mm-hmm.
And friend groups, a lot of times we don't think that way. We don't really use them in that capacity, but this has made us much closer as friends, and it's become this really beautiful piece of how we can connect together as friends. And now I have a couple sets of friends do this now. I've had groups do it at a bachelor party, and I have other sets of friends where we'll get together once a year for 4 or 5 of us, and we've just learned a lot about how to structure this friend group to, I don't know, it makes the friendships feel that much stronger now that they're actively helping you with whatever you're dealing with in life.
Right. And there's a few benefits. One is just the actual friends, and in particular with longtime friends, as we change and evolve and have different interests, we change as a person. And so the people we've known the longest maybe know a younger version of yourself that maybe isn't as aligned to that person today. So this could maybe be a way to bridge that gap with some of those long-term friendships.
Mm-hmm.
And the other component of this is I think the same thing about therapy, where even if I were to go and talk to a wall for I don't know, once a month for 30 minutes, just articulating oh, what is top of mind, structuring it somehow. And there could be nobody on the other side of the room. And it's still probably going to be helpful just to articulate. But like you said, to have these agents, these people there with really good feedback and ideas and other smart people, it feels like I don't know, why wouldn't everyone do this to have that sort of feedback in their life?
Yeah, and most of us, we want to help our friends, but it's hard to do that, and we don't quite know what they want. And this just gives a structure for doing that in an easier way. And again, for us, it was helpful to we call it the bourbon boardroom. And again, it's that thing of draping it in the language of alcohol and business made us as kind of hardcore dudes,
Mm-hmm.
trying to make it in the world, get a little more comfortable sharing some of that scary stuff. So no, it's been really good. And to your point, just I'm not a naturally self-reflective person. So having this forcing function to sit down and think, well, how do I want to, get value from this group, and just having to collect my thoughts is valuable. But I will share, another friend of mine has done an interesting variant of it, and he calls it a shareholder meeting, which is because, a board meeting is when you get the board of a company together. But for example, if you have bought Apple stock, you can go online and listen to the Apple shareholder meeting. So a friend of mine does that. He calls it his annual shareholder meeting. And what he does is he invites all his friends, but he invites kind of people he's just met, maybe a girl he's dating. He invites colleagues who he likes and trusts. But the first time he did it, there were 60 people on this Zoom call, and he actually has a slide deck where he goes kind of deep with it. He shared how much money he made and what was going well. So he got really deep. But I'm actually considering doing a similar version of this, something just broader, but invite a ton of people and say, hey, here's what I'm up to. And just in case I'm doing anything to be helpful to others. And yeah, honestly, just to ask people if, who are up for helping me. And I share I do a lot of work supporting founders, and I do a lot of work teaching entrepreneurs and knowledge workers how to do video work. So I create a lot of content that is trying to help other people. It's really trying to share. And so you find that if you share helpful stuff with people on the internet for a long enough time, they want to help you back. And so I've thought about this as a vehicle for, maybe just saying hey, here's some things I'm thinking about. If anyone has expertise here, I'd love to pick your brain on it, or just things like that. But it was just really cool to see people try this in a different way and get really cool results of it. And I just attended his second shareholder meeting last week, which was really cool to see.
Yeah, I like that. I've heard the prompt too. If, say you're presenting to your shareholders or presenting to your board, here are the updates of my life, would the shareholders fire you? Would they promote you? At some point you get a real gauge for, okay, maybe underperforming here, maybe I can improve in these ways. And in your blog post, I like how one of the photos was you had printed out the one person's update or slide deck, and
Yeah.
laminated it, and you guys were all in the hot tub just kind of going over it. And
Yeah.
the other one, you were
Yeah.
actually like in front of a, like, it looks like a conference room, and you can kind of see it was like
Yeah.
health, business, wealth. Like, do you use the same buckets and then you just go in and update the template, or like, what does it specifically look like for you?
So for me, I like to marinate on these things and think about them for a while. But it's interesting. Each person in that group handles it totally different. Like there's one person who brings a full slide deck, very carefully thought out. They even maybe showed it to some other people in advance of it because they really want to do it. There's other people who literally the first time they are thinking about this is when they get in front of the group of people and just say, all right, guys, here's what's up.
Mm.
Some people say, I have nothing to say, just ask me questions. Some people talk the whole time. And, one guy's father passed away, and, he just wasn't in a position to do this. So he just talked about his dad the whole time. And so it's just very much what people make of it. And I did that thing of, any complex system that works usually didn't begin in a complex way. It usually started simple and became complex. So designing really complex systems off the rip, like from the jump, whenever I do that, it usually fails. And so with this, I overplanned it, of course. And over time, now that we've done it so many times, we've realized that no, let people do it the way they want. Let them see what they want to get out of it. And if you're doing this with a group of friends for the first time, which again, I'm feeling a little apprehensive about that, is a pretty valid thing. You could make it super short, and you could also decide how much do you want to share. You could share some very surface level stuff. Hey, my bench is 180. I want to get it to 185. Like, how should I do this, right? But I found that where the real richness comes is when more you kind of bare your soul, the better outcomes come from it, because it gives permission to other people in the group to do that. So I would encourage you to be pretty vulnerable when you try it, but it's really, there's no right way or wrong way to do it. It's interesting that a tendency of us to get together, though, when you get together with people, is to fall into old patterns. And sometimes those old patterns are just drinking heavily. At least that's what it was with us. And so it was just really nice to shift the focus because you outgrow that over time. Right?
Yeah, there's this concept of intellectual nudity, of exposing yourself or your ideas or your thoughts, whether it's writing a blog post or sharing stuff like this, where it almost feels like, uh-oh, did I share too much? It's that like scary feeling which is actually
Mm-hmm.
a signal, a good thing, because oftentimes, I guess speaking for myself, it's like, you don't want to share those things. I'd rather treat that like my water and keep that bottled up. But this is like a safe mechanism, not only to share that, but also for you to synthesize your own thoughts and be like, okay, what is the update? It's Q2, Q4 now. What's the update? What do I want the update to be Q1 of next year, or whatever frequency that you choose? And I was reading, who was it? Tyler Dank is the CEO of and founder of Beehive, and one of the things he said is
Mm.
his top advice for anyone, especially entrepreneurs, is to send a monthly investor update, even if you don't have any investors, because it forces this accountability. And his is an actual company update of KPIs and metrics, and he knows for himself that he's just that competitive to know, okay, this is going out. I really want to make these metrics go in the right direction. But I think the similar concept applies to what we're talking about here for, okay, this is what I said I was going to do, or just having some form of both the accountability and feedback in this circle or board.
Mm-hmm. And I read a newsletter as well. I'm familiar with Tyler's work, and I know what Beehive is. And I use my newsletter in a similar way. Again, the whole point of it, like any sort of content creation, is you want 90% of it helping others. You want 90% of it value, beneficial for the people reading it. But if there's something I need to know about, or I'm trying to meet someone, like I do corporate innovation work a lot of times, helping a large organization learn how to be more innovative. And if I'm trying to get in with a certain company, I'll ask in my newsletter, hey, does anyone know anyone here? I'm trying to get in there, like all the time. And newsletters are nice in that nobody owns newsletters. They're just, email is an unowned medium. So if the Twitter algorithm changes, you might be screwed. But if you got someone's email address, they're going to get it. And I certainly recommend to all founders to send an email update. And it's also okay if that email update is, it's to advisors and investors. And it's okay if, There's no real investors, but just to let them know what you're dealing with, let them know that you exist, because it's a pretty busy world out there. And so a lot of times, some of the best deals I'll get when someone remembers that I exist. They remember that I do this sort of work. But sometimes they'll, I'm not the number one priority in their life. So they're going to forget that I do this kind of work and they'll hire someone else. But if they, through the newsletter and other things, remember that I exist, they'll hire me a lot of times. So I'm a big, big fan of newsletters as a way just to keep people updated on your life. And again, if you're doing it well, it's not just about you all the time. They'll like it and they'll appreciate it and they'll value it.
Right. And for someone listening to this who maybe doesn't have a newsletter, or it maybe feels like a big task to ask their friends to do this, hey, I heard about this personal board of directors thing, let's try it out. Maybe the smaller version or the 3-day startup version, just breaking it down will just be a simple Google Doc that you don't share with anybody, of just having, health, business, wealth, whatever, and then just have a calendar reminder at the end of the month. One of the things I started doing in my Evernote is just breaking out the month and the year. I've done this for a couple of years now, where it's each month. So I have a November 2023 note, and then at the top I'll just put highlights, and then at the end of the month I'll just go through, look at my calendar, and just note any highlights of like, oh yeah, I completely forgot about that. That was this month. And then I could go back to November 2022, and I feel like my memory isn't that good, but as soon as I look at that note, I instantly remember. And it's just a good way to sort of organize your thoughts and be like, okay, well, what do I want December to look like? And put a little bit of thought, and it gives that new, fresh start as well. So perhaps someone could do that. Any other advice for someone to just start with this?
Well, I mean, to your point, I do similar stuff. Whenever I send my newsletter out, it always has some personal stuff in it. And so I snooze it for 3 months. And so that means like every 3 months after I send it, I get to revisit it, similar to what you're saying. I've also, sometimes if a noteworthy event happens in my life, whether it's good or bad, I'll make a calendar invite and then make it annually recurring. So a year later, I'll get this reminder of, oh, this was happening in my life. And that can help recenter. I'm also, as I mentioned, I'm not very self-reflective, and I also don't have a great memory. So I'm very interested in how can I make sure that we're learning from the past, not repeating the same mistakes, that sort of thing. And so just little tricks like that, because what I don't want to do is try harder. I've got enough cognitive willpower that I'm trying to direct towards certain outcomes. And I just don't want to have to remember anything. So that's what technology is for, is to help revisit those sort of things and make sure we're thinking in that way.
Yeah, I like it. I also really like the aspect. I've never met somebody, or at least that I'm aware of, that also does the annual event thing. I've done that at least 2 times off the top of my head. Of one, when I quit my corporate job, and it was just significant to me of like actively choosing myself, and so I reflect on that every June on that date. And then also I was very touched emotionally when Kobe Bryant passed away. And so I keep, I think it's August 24th is like Mamba Day. I mean, that's what it is on my calendar, but I think that's like an actual thing. I'm not calling it that. Maybe I could be wrong there. Maybe I'm just calling it that, but I think it's an actual thing, which is right near his birthday. And I don't know, just for whatever reason, I really could, like, I'll wake up extra early that day, go on an extra long run, and just having those events that we connect to, that we get to set on autopilot, recurring annual. You could always delete it if you don't resonate with it either. I like that a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
The other thing I want to talk about is, so my observation is you have a tendency to just kind of go for things and tinker, like, oh, this would be cool. Let me try that out, which I love. And I think you are like a part-time lecturer at UT about entrepreneurship. How does one do that? I love that. I want to do that. How do I do that?
So with that company, 3-day startup, I ran that company for a decade, and eventually there was a point where the company had gotten large enough, and we'd run, hundreds of these programs all over the world, that we were making the University of Texas look very good. And we had a bunch of burnt orange, which is the color of Texas, in our logo. And so we still ran one for the school, but a few departments in the school asked if we could run a version specifically for them. And a particular department approached us and said, hey, we want to do this. We want kind of the deluxe version. And I gave them the deluxe price, which was more than they could handle. But I had a long desire to be a professor, one, just because I was curious about that and it seemed fun, but also 3-day startup and my current company, ActionWorks, my biggest customers are foreign governments, large corporations. They're companies that had never heard of ActionWorks, never heard of 3-day startup, but they damn sure know the University of Texas. And
Mm,
so I could use the credibility and institutional authority that came from being affiliated with this prestigious university, a tier one research university. I could use that as a good inroad to work with those organizations. And so they said, hey, well, could you run this for us? And I said, sure, but I'm happy to do this. Could I somehow get involved in a professorial capacity? And they said, yeah, sure. They were very, very open to that. And they also, at this point, 3-day startup had become a pretty successful company. So it was only like they wanted to have more faculty that had actual business experience and success in entrepreneurial ventures. So that got me in there. And what was interesting is once I got in there, that opened up all these other doors. So I'm a guest professor at a school in Colombia every couple of years. Just go down to Bogota and kind of run some stuff down there. And guest professorship. Does the same thing in Australia. So once you get in the door once, as soon as you're like in a club, you're good enough for everybody else. It's very much like if you're a founder, you get your lead investor. As soon as you get the lead investor, everyone else is okay. But a lot of times people don't want to be first. So that got me in there. And then if you just do a good job at teaching, which I had no desire for a formal academic career, publishing, that sort of thing, which meant all I cared about was being an amazing professor and helping the students learn, which kind of fuels me to do this, is I didn't feel like I got a great education and entrepreneurship growing up. So I just wanted to give it to the next generation. And so, no, that was great. So at this point, I've taught in a bunch of different departments at University of Texas and other places. And it opens a lot of doors having that capacity. So I'm very grateful. And all of my entrepreneurial success would not exist at all if it weren't for the University of Texas, even though I lovingly poop on them from time to time about how I think they could do a better job of teaching that stuff. But no, very big fan of UT and, burn orange, and my emotional well-being is directly connected to the performance of the football team. So,
nice.
but I don't think I addressed your earlier question, which was if you want to become a professor, how do you do that? And the easiest way to do it are start a company that is wildly successful. That helps a lot. It's also good to take guest lecture opportunities. So ask anyone who's a professor, hey, could I ever do a guest lecture in your course sometime? Just come in and you speak for half an hour, and just doing that opens up a lot of doors. I had a friend who guest lectured for me once and I was just calling it, I needed someone great to run a great experience for my students. And he did. And he was able to parlay that into a professorship at Stanford. Again, he was an adjunct, so he wasn't a formal, but again, the Stanford, adjunct professor status was a big deal. So guest lecture if you can, but it also, just the things that connects to what I think is pretty smart for any professional to do, like any knowledge worker, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, is if you share what you're thinking on the internet on a regular basis, opportunities come your way. If you just share you're having an opinion, some thought, some meaningful insights on what's going on in the world or your field, doing that oftentimes will get enough people's attention, which we can get opportunities for guest speaking and that sort of thing, which is a lot of my work, is teaching people who have expertise in one form or fashion to get it out there so that people know they have it. Right.
Totally. Which, by the way, is how we met and connected, putting interesting stuff
Yeah.
out on the internet. So before we wrap up, I want to ask a couple just quick questions. So through
Yeah.
all these experiences or studying these different companies and seeing how different organizations are run, is there any sort of insights or perhaps aha moments or intellectual epiphanies that come to mind that you've learned along your way that maybe has forced you to look at the world in a different way after learning it?
Yeah. So for me, the first time I ever ran a leadership innovation program at Apple, I was terrified. I, like a lot of people, love Apple. I think Apple is this wonderful, amazing company. I mean, there's so many products that Apple released. I'm like, what a stupid idea. And I'll try it. And I'm like, oh my God, this is incredible. I'm dumb. I should never doubt Apple. And so the first time I was running a program for them, I was like, they're all going to be superhuman. They're all going to be just geniuses. And when I ran this program for them, I realized that no, there was even some parts of the back end of setting this thing up and getting the logistics going that wasn't run the correct way. And I was just reminded that behind every company and every person, what they share on the internet is they are amazing, they are incredible, everything is perfect. But if you peel back the curtain, there's disorder and chaos, just like in every company. No company is doing everything perfectly. And I find that incredibly heartening. And it drastically changed my perspective on the world, because it means that if I'm a little bit disordered, I'm not going to worry about it. And a good metaphor for this is video. Look at this shot right now. You see this nice background. You see this nice lighting. Again, I got this like very photogenic cat. But Mitch, just on the outside of the frame, we've got an exercise bike that's like not positioned well. I've got some dirty dishes in the sink. That's all of us. That is like the metaphor for life. And so that's okay. What you should take from that is inspiration of, wow, I don't need to have it all figured out. What I need to do is I need to get started. I need to do this work. I need to start building. I need to start making. I need to start sharing my ideas. And it doesn't need to be perfect. And so that was a big deal for me because I was always wondering, am I running my company the right way? And, I always thought I was running it pretty well, but nothing was ever 100% perfect. And then you realize nobody's perfect and that's okay. And what most people do is they just never get started. And so that to me just really changed the way I orient and approach the world.
Love that. So I was watching the Netflix documentary Untold Swamp Kings, the story about the Tim Tebow Florida Gators football team in late 2000s.
I saw that. Yeah.
And I was so amped up seeing the clip of their Friday nights. And so most college students or probably athletes do Friday nights, you're going out, you're partying. Friday nights at University of Florida, they were going to the gym at midnight and they were going hard too. And like they have a clip of Tebow being like, and I loved it. And I just get like goosebumps thinking about that because inserting yourself in any environment, whether it's a football team, whether it's an MBA program, or a startup, a company, a friend group, a personal board of directors, that environment helps raise everyone once everyone's committed. And so I was just really, really inspired by that just from a simple, Netflix show or documentary that I think was pertinent to this conversation. Are there any other random or unexpected sources of inspiration in your life that stick out?
There's tons. First of all, I saw that series and I loved it. It was
So
just
good.
super great. And I'm very interested a lot of my work is nominally as an educator. And that means I'm trying to make people make their way in the world. And it's interesting how much of our impact on the world is not necessarily from our neocortex and our forebrain and our thoughts. What I loved about that was like the energy and hype of those guys. And a lot of times as an educator, I'm trying to give people like a full bodied experience. So I make them do weird exercises and all kinds of stuff just to get the nervous system involved.
This has been awesome, Cam.
Yeah.
Where can people find you on the internet?
Go to my website, camhauser.com, and join my newsletter. My newsletter it's about video entrepreneurship and shooting your shot. I'm just really interested in getting opportunities by way of sliding in the DMs, trying weird things. And that's what we talk about. And so if you liked any of the stories I told, I think you'd like that newsletter.
This is awesome. Cam, thank you so much. I'm inspired today by some of your stories. And I think we all can, one lesson learned, shoot more shots. It never hurts to ask. Cam Hauser, everyone. Check him out.
Thanks, Mitch.
Thank you.